The renewed fighting between Iran and the US has cast fresh doubts over their interim truce. A permanent peace deal now appears increasingly unlikely, with US claiming that the Strait of Hormuz can be restored to its previous free-flowing state that also appear increasingly implausible. This latest escalation shows how the Strait of Hormuz has become the central battleground in a war that began over Iran's alleged nuclear ambitions. The US and its Arab Gulf allies are determined to prevent Iran from establishing hegemony over Hormuz, the lifeline for a large share of the world's oil and gas supplies. Iran, on the other hand, insists on asserting joint authority over the strait and has floated the idea of transit fees or service charges. Reports suggest that the White House is preparing for what could become a multi-day or even multi-week exchange of fire with Iran over the Strait of Hormuz. Parallelly, shipping through the Strait of Hormuz has once again plunged. According to marine traffic data, only 13 commercial vessels transited the Strait of Hormuz in the past 24 hours. For Tehran, the strait remains its strongest bargaining chip. Since the war began, Iranian forces have mined the strait, attacked commercial vessels and reduced traffic through the waterway by an estimated 95%. The result has been the biggest supply disruption in the history of global oil market. Control of the strait is also central to Iran's asymmetric warfare strategy. The US possesses overwhelming military superiority. Iran's greatest strength, however, lies in its political resolve as well as determination to survive. Tehran is determined for now to show the US and the region that it remains in control and will not back down despite losing much of its senior leadership. It appears prepared to absorb enormous economic and security costs, and that is to pursue that objective. That resolve is evident in its willingness to threaten civilian shipping using low-cost drones, fast attack boats, and other asymmetric tactics. The text of the Memorandum of Understanding has further hardened Iran's position. Paragraph 5 states that Iran will make arrangements to restore shipping through the strategic waterway before working with Oman to determine its future administration. In Tehran, many have interpreted this as recognition of Iran's exclusive authority over the strait. Ghalibaf even cited the clause on social media while arguing that Iran controls the strait and that shipping will resume only under Iranian terms. It was Ghalibaf who earlier declared that Hormuz would never return to its previous status. As for Tehran, this dispute is not really about toll revenue. Any income from transit fees would be modest compared with Iran's oil revenues. The real objective is to establish a precedent on sovereignty over the world's most strategic energy choke point. Its most powerful leverage in any future negotiations with the United States going forward.
هیچ پیامی ارسال نکردیم.
And joining us live on the broadcast from Paris is war correspondent and analyst Alige Magne. Mr. Alige, appreciate you joining us on the broadcast. Coming straight to it, US claims to have facilitated the safe transit of more than 800 commercial vessels through Hormuz, and that is since the ceasefire took effect. According to marine traffic data, at least 13 commercial vessels have transited the Strait of Hormuz in the past 24 hours, which is a major plunge. The question is, can US get the old Hormuz back?
Thank you for inviting me. No, the US cannot have the Strait of Hormuz to its previous situation prior February 2026 because it has remained the only leverage Iran has today to negotiate about its frozen asset, lifting all the sanctions, and the compensation for all the damage that the Israeli and the US war on Iran. Therefore, if we look at the picture from 2018, when Donald Trump pulled out of the JCPOA that was stipulated by Barack Obama in 2015, until 2026, Iran had no leverage whatsoever to ask or negotiate with the Americans about lifting the sanctions. The Strait of Hormuz today is the only card Iran has, and regardless of the threat and the menace that the Americans will direct toward Iran, even by bombing it every single day or intensifying the bombing, Iran will not let go, and the Strait of Hormuz will not return to prior February 2026.
Elijah, point taken, but given the current situation and US carrying out fresh strikes, is there any scope of Iran allowing Hormuz to go back to its old status, specifically in terms of free and safe transit? The question is why and why not, and who has the cards at this point of time?
Well, Iran is not saying that it's not going to allow a free transit. However, Iran, according to the MOU paragraph 5, is negotiating with Oman, and I think they've reached an agreement on specific fees, like in the Bosphorus, like in other passages around the world, where Iran will ask for services fees, which means environment support, services that they can offer to ships in distress, or whatever services they can offer, but they will not ask for payment for transit. However, that is related and only depending on the end of the war. The war has not ended. We're still in a state of war, and the Americans did not fulfill the MOU related to releasing the Iranian asset that is stipulated in the first paragraphs of the MOU. Therefore, the Americans have not fulfilled yet their commitment, and Iran had the control because the insurance companies and the ship owners will not risk a huge amount that costs the ship to cross the Strait of Hormuz and risk being attacked by the Iranian IRGC. This is why we have seen the 13 or 15 ships yesterday after the exchange of fire between the Americans and the Iranians, really adopting the northern passage next to the Larak Island designated by Iran and not as invited by the US navies, because ship owners and insurances are afraid they just don't want this headache.
Yes, Elijah, that's exactly the point I was coming to. Iran has warned oil tankers to use only routes it has approved through the Strait of Hormuz. Shouldn't the US at this point of time be in tandem with Iran over the specific safe route that has been asked for by Iran at this stage while the backdoor negotiations are on? When we talk about all those commercial vessels passing through the strategic waterway, shouldn't the safe passage to the specific route be the option at this point?
It is the only option available because the Iranians are calling upon the MOU. Paragraph 5 says that Iran had 30 days to demine the strait, and only Iran, for commercial vessels to cross, twice mentioned as commercial vessels, to cross the Strait of Hormuz in coordination with Iran. So that is very clearly stated. And Donald Trump signed this deal in Versailles, Paris, and he was aware of the content. Now, the Americans maybe have their own interpretation, saying, well, no, the passage need to be completely open for navigation. But unfortunately, the two countries that control the strait are Oman and Iran. And there is no mention of CENTCOM of the US in the MOU or in West Asia. Therefore, the Iranians and the Omani are undertaking talks because Oman refused to ask for payment for the passage, and Iran accepted not to ask for payment, but they both agreed that as long as there is already a company asking for services, why don't we, Iran and Oman, ask for these exact same services, and then the navigation will be restored. But it is not about paragraph 5, and it is not about MOU. It is about who is going to impose the hegemony over the Strait of Hormuz and what's going to happen to the power of the Americans if they fail to impose this on Iran.
Yes, Elijah, so would you concur that US and Iran should come to a middle ground as far as that specific route is concerned? Because for now, US is not on the same page as Iran when it comes to those claims that the Iranian regime has been making.
Well, unfortunately, what you are stating here, you are using logic and the best way to come out. Unfortunately, this is not how the situation is. If the Americans allow the Iranians to ask for services fees only, it means Iran is a regional power, and the US not only has failed to protect itself and its bases in the Gulf country and protect its allies in the Gulf countries, but it has failed to impose its will on Iran, which means the beginning of the end of the US hegemony. Therefore, it is not logic or treaty here. It is who is in power here.
Yes, Elijah, going by the statements coming in from President Trump over the last few days, he says that fresh strikes carried out by the US on Iran are retribution for attacks on those commercial ships. In your thought, do you think what is going on is retribution or the way ahead to a full-fledged war resumption?
Well, Donald Trump can continue bombing Iran every single day, multiply it by 20 and by 200. Iran is not going to let go of its only card. But what happened is that the Americans are trying to take away this card. What they've done is they have instructed 3 countries, because these countries are rich, Qatar, Emiratis, and Saudi Arabia, and they have escorted 3 tankers, 1 LNG, is gas from Qatar, and 2 oil from Saudi Arabia and the Emiratis. And these 3 countries assume the responsibility and the risk. And by escorting them and being attacked, these countries now have the excuse to say, well, thank you very much, we've tried. We don't want to provoke again Iran, because Iran is not going nowhere. Geographically, Iran is there, and the Arabs and the Gulf countries need to deal with it. And this is what the reasoning of the Gulf country, even if they don't like Iran and they don't want to deal with it, but it's an ipso facto, it's there on the ground. This is where the Americans are really not finding a good ground to talk to the Arab and turn them against Iran, because the Americans tried, and the Arab was waiting for the defeat of Iran by the 2 very powerful armies, the Israelis and the Americans, and 2 nuclear armies, but they have failed to achieve their objective. Now there is a new reality, and they have to give Iran this concession that Iran is going to disturb the entire traffic, 20% of the world oil, unless Iran imposes its conditions that the end of the sanction, and Iran will not let go because it has no other leverage.
Yes, Elijah, very quickly, running short on time, if you were to tell us, do you think diplomacy is dead at this point? What is the way forward in your viewpoint?
Diplomacy is never dead. It's always ongoing, even if the Americans and the Iranians suspended the talks. Next week, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi of Iran will start someday, Tuesday or Wednesday, to regain diplomacy, because the military means is failing. The Americans can bomb Iran, but there are no objectives behind it. The initial objectives failed to be achieved by the Americans and the Israelis. And now if the Americans are bombing civilian and infrastructure targets, it means they have no more military objective in their bank of objectives. So they can try to intimidate Iran, but Iran has nothing to lose. Therefore, it is not going to be intimidated. It's going to retaliate, increase the cost on everybody in West Asia, but will hold on to it. So yes, diplomacy is the only way forward.
Right. Elijah, point taken, and of course remains to be seen whether any de-escalation does happen or not. For now, the US maintains that it has temporarily paused strikes on Iran.
Yeah, this is going to remain, and in my guess, for the next 2 years, but not immediately. It's going to be solved in the next month or 2. No, the Americans will not let go, will not declare that the Iranians have won, and Donald Trump cannot admit that.
Yes. Elijah, point taken. Appreciate you speaking to WION. Let's see how things move forward and whether there is breakthrough or not in days going forward.
Thank you for inviting me.